So that's why CMY is what we start with when we start talking about colors for printing. But if you've ever done print before, or you worked in a print in a art package and gone into one of the print color modes, it's never CMY, it's always CMYK. What's the K? Well, the K actually is for black ink, and the reason it's not B for black is because RGB already was like blue for, B for blue, and so CMYB would be like, do you mean cyan, magenta, yellow, blue, or what, right? So K was reserved specifically for black, so it's black, not blue. So the idea behind CMYK as a color model instead of just CMY is purely based on the practicalities of printing. So printing is a physical process. It involves physical inks that have real limitations. Those inks accumulate on a piece of paper, and furthermore, when you're doing a print run, you had to pay for them, right? Those inks cost real money, and it's not nearly as cheap as like the electricity that powers a monitor, for example. So it's a real physical good that has a lot of processing behind it. It's weighty. It has to be delivered on trucks, right? It's a much more physical, involved, industrial thing than just I turned on electricity and flowed it through the monitor, right? So when you're thinking about how you're going to print something and you're trying to do an efficient job, which printers always are, because it's always about cost and quality, right? They're trying to balance those two things and get as much quality as they can for a certain expense, right? The reason that you add a black ink is because grayscale things are very common, right? So things that inherently don't actually have any color in them. So for example, the text in every book, it doesn't really have much of a color. It's mostly just gray, dark gray, or black, right? And we're very used to typesetting books this way, and almost everything that involves fonts is this way, and we have lots of grayscale imaging and other stuff like that, right? So if you were to use a purely CMY process to produce grayscale or black printing, then the problem you have is not only do you now have to pay for 3 inks, right? So you have to pay for 3 different inks that you're going to use to ink this particular thing, but you also have to make sure that they mix right. And that can be incredibly tricky, as we'll start to see when we get a little bit further down this discussion and talk about how offset printing or web printing, there's a lot of different print jargon that we won't really go into because honestly, I'm not an expert in it. It's more about like how printing presses speak amongst themselves and talk about their particular processes. But when you talk about, I'll use a general description of the kinds we mean here. When you use a print process where the ink is never mixed until it hits the paper, so you can imagine having these inks, I could mix them together first, and then I could put them on the page. Or I can put them on the page one after the other and let them mix there, right? So when we're talking about processes that look like that, so there's successive layerings of ink that are happening, if you don't get the registration just right, then when you're trying to slap down 3 different, CMY to try and produce a black, you're going to get fringing. You'll get color fringing, right? Because maybe the cyan ink was a little bit to the left or bled into the paper a little bit chemically more than the magenta ink did, than the yellow ink did, and now there's some chromatic aberration, right, kind of around this thing. And when you're printing a rich, full color image, you don't care because it's all this sort of continuous mixture of ink that's producing like a continuous visual image. So you don't mind that the registration is not, atomically perfect, right? But if you're just printing white background, printing black text on a white background, well, you really do. You don't want to be trying to read this page, in a book and seeing all this like cyan, magenta fringing, all over the place. Now, as I say that, I'm talking about printing in the 1980s or whatever, right? When people expected things to look good. Since Microsoft introduced ClearType technology, people are probably now a lot more used to seeing chromatic aberration around all of their text, so it's all ugly and colorized on the sides. That's just something that happened. So it might be that nowadays you don't care as much. I don't know. Not for me to say. Clear type still bugs me quite a bit, so I don't want to go back to a CMY style process where there's all this fringing. So anyway, assuming you care about crispness and quality and lack of chromatic aberration, that's another good reason to use a black ink, right? Because it allows you to lay down black or gray elements on a page without having registration errors that may be almost impossible to correct if you're talking about such narrow, like little thin, high contrast things like thin font lines or very fine black or gray brush strokes, right? And there's potentially even a third reason, and the third reason is it's just more options. And that leads me basically into what I want to talk about next. If you imagine trying to produce some color image or anything you want to produce on a printed page, like I said, it's a very physical process. It has real limitations, and the ink technology that we currently have, at least, isn't perfect. So the CMY model of mixing inks together to produce colors can't produce all the colors you can produce on a monitor. It's just not feasible to do so, okay? So monitor tech, like the emitting, reproducing of images by emitting color, our tech is way better now for that than the printed pages. It's like it's surpassed it. So the gamut, which is another way, if you've never heard that term before, of saying all of the colors we can produce. The gamut of a modern, especially like an HDR monitor, is just much wider than the inks that we have. And so throwing a black ink in there along with a cyan, magenta, and yellow ink also is just another way in which you can tune the ink mixture to produce other colors. So instead of having to add C, M, and Y together to darken something, you can instead use some black ink to darken it, and so on, right? So it's just adding an extra degree of freedom that we wouldn't need if inks were perfect, but they're not perfect. And so it just gives us another way to potentially attack the problem of getting a good looking image on a printed page. So coming back to this image, this is what Anna draws if she has no printing constraints. She will just make this, and the reason that I picked this page was because you can see there's a lot of fluorescent action here, right? Things like rocket engines, radioactive goop like this, any sort of stuff. An artist is free to make very vibrant, glowy, fluorescent, neon colors in an RGB color space, and that will work just fine. This, on the other hand, this, and let me just flip that better. Here's the RGB one. This is what that looks like in CMYK. And again, this isn't the actual CMYK because I'm not holding a printed sheet, right? But a monitor's estimation. So if we try to fake it by reducing the color space that the monitor can actually show, this is more what we could realistically achieve. And as you can see up here, it just loses a fair bit of that glowy cyan, right? And that's just a very typical thing. Bright neon or fluorescent greens and blues, that's just a very challenging thing for CMYK ink process. It just doesn't quite work. And it's because, again, we don't tend to really have inks, CMY inks, that can really do what you need to do to get that fluorescent color. There's a caveat to that, though. So, take that with a grain of salt and hope that I don't forget to tell you more about that when we get to cover images. Because even though I'm telling you right now we don't have inks that can do that, well, actually, we do have inks that can do that. It's just you probably don't want to use them. So we'll talk about that later. Right now, let's focus on CMYK. So, Hopefully here you can see, if I flip between these two images a little bit here, right, you can kind of see what those two look like. This brings us to the first thing that you actually want to make sure that you do to all of your images in Cmyk. So we covered the first step in Prepress, which is get your monitor calibrated properly. But thing number 2 you want to do is start to correct color problems. I should say it's the first thing you do to your images, not the first thing you do to your setup, right? So when you take your RGB images and you convert them to Cmyk, you're going to get results that may be okay and maybe aren't okay. In this case, Anna felt this was fine. It's an okay image. She liked the way it looked. In other cases, she didn't, and I'll show you some of that later on. But what you have to do is now go through all of your artwork and really take a close look at it to see if the transition from RGB to Cmyk created any problems, and if there are problems, you have to fix them. But now here comes the big but. How do you know really what the colors should be? I mean, I just went through this whole thing, right, of like, hey, if you want to be serious about artwork, you're going to have to get a color calibrated monitor, and you need to set up this color profile, and now you just said, well, Cmyk, and then go look for problems. So 100% true. You actually can't start looking for Cmyk problems until you set up a Cmyk color profile. And what is this? Well, it's exactly the same thing as you have with the monitor, you have with a print process. So when you decide what printer you're going to go with and you establish a relationship with that printer, you need to ask them what color profile, what ICC color profile their press most closely resembles, right? And they will know this answer. All printers will know. If a printer doesn't know that, don't print with them, right? Any printer who knows anything about printing at all has that information. And so then what you will do is you'll come back here. Before we talked about this, there's these Photoshop color settings. This Cmyk line, that's where that gets set. And so RGB, that's how you set up what your monitor is, right? And then Cmyk, this is how you set up what your that's how you set up what your print target is. So whatever the actual place that you're going to print with, they should tell you what it is. And you'll see stuff like this where it says US web coded SWOPv2. You'll see weird stuff like that, and you won't have any idea what it means. But actually what these are just print terms. So US is obviously just because, hey, in the United States, there's a sort of some different print standards than there are overseas. For example, Japan print presses, you typically have a different one and so on. So you'll see different things like that. Web doesn't mean internet. Web is a description of a type of press. So a web printing process is actually like a description of the press. Coded is talking about the paper, right? Like, so what is the coding going to be on the paper? Is it uncoated paper or coated paper? And then you've got this WSOPv2. I have no idea where those things come from. Don't ask me. I am not a print professional, like I said. It doesn't matter. You don't have to know any of the things I just said. What you do have to know is whatever your printer tells you their print press uses, you want to make sure that you set that standard, because that is the thing that Photoshop will use to try to give you a preview of what it will probably look like when printed by constricting the colors that your monitor can display down into the range that the press can, and also shifting them around based on how it thinks it will get printed, right? So that's crucial. Okay, so back to this. So when you do your color conversion and you've set those things properly, you should see something that gives you a reasonable idea of what it looks like. And this is your first chance to preview the artwork and make sure that you don't see any glaring errors in it, because you want to look at this and say, oh, did anything in the Cmyk conversion really cause a problem? And if it did, you need to go readjust your source art. So you need to adjust your layers, you need to apply, an HSV to it or something. You need to use Photoshop tools to try and correct the color balance to something that you find acceptable, okay? So let's take a look at some place where that happened, just to give you an idea of where that's at. So here is an example of a plate from Meow the Infinite. And I want you to take a look here up at the Great Stellar Unicorn. And what you can see here is in the original RGB plate, this is a very glowy horn with sort of like a bright rainbow thing shining out, and it's got these kind of wonky hooves with these little like ridiculous neon colors on them, right? And when this gets converted to CMYK, what you can see here is if I flip between them, it dulls out a lot, right? So do you see how like all of the like luster is kind of sucked out of it to a certain extent? So all of it kind of gets duller. And so what Anna did here is you can see when she went in and changed the image in CMYK, she added back in as best she could some like highlighting there. She brightened up this area again because it's not supposed to be dark up there, and it's supposed to have more of a highlight. So again, there's no hard and fast rule for this. This is artist's preference, but the idea is you're seeing what your comic will probably look like when it's printed, and the artist has to be happy with that. I mean, they're the one who designed the page and what its color should look like, and so they should look at it and say, does this represent the image the way I wanted it? And if it doesn't, you need to fix that. You don't want that to get all the way to the printer and have them be deciding how to fix it, okay? So, next thing we have to talk about is that K channel. So, as you can see from here to here, this actually got a lot less dark. It's more like gray, right? It's more like a sort of a dark gray than a deep black, okay? So what's that about? Well, the next thing you have to understand about CMYK process, and this is if you really want to do your prepress well, you should understand this, is that black, once you put fairly full amount of black ink on the page, 25, 50, 75% as you start to get higher, right? Well, it's going to be black. I mean, it's going to be like a gray. It's going to be at least a dark gray, right? At some point, you will have put as much black ink on the page as the printing press in one pass can actually put down. Like, that's just how much it can actually deposit in one pass. And that's the maximum level of black ink you can put there. That amount of black ink is like this color, sort of. It's sort of a dark gray, but it's not really black. Like, it's not like violent black, deep, non-reflective, pure black, right? So what you can do if you want a more vibrant black for some reason, like depending on how you're actually going to set up a particular image, if you really want like a super, super black, you can use what's called rich black. So this, where you just have 100% black ink and no CMY, that's called, in print parlance, flat black. And flat black is the darkest black you can get without using other ink. Rich black is when you add cyan, magenta, and yellow ink together to your black ink. So all four passes are laying down ink, all in the same place. And what that will do is that will reduce the reflectivity even further, right? Because now not only do you have the black ink taking out all the wavelengths as much as it can, but you have cyan taking out as much red as it can, you have magenta taking out as much green as it can, and you have yellow taking out as much red. Did I say that right? Blue. You have cyan taking as much red as you can, you have magenta taking out as much green as you can, and you have yellow taking out as much red as you can. It's hard to keep them all straight. Right? So that produces a deeper black color. And you can use that to your advantage when you're creating a CMYK plate. If you really find you need to get some deep black, you can use that. But there are lots of problems with it. One is if you do that, you're right back to the problem I was talking about when I said why we have black ink in the first place. One of the reasons I listed was because you don't want that chromatic aberration. You don't want fringing. So for example, if you were to use rich black on like this text, you would be right back to having those sort of fringing, the color fringing on the letters. And you don't want that blurriness, right? You want them to be crisp. And the other thing is, it's much more expensive and actually makes the paper also like more saturated, right? Because if I'm going to deposit all four inks on here and just load it up, well, the print process gets more expensive too, because you have to buy more ink for all of that, and the page itself gets like, more saturated ink. So there's a limit to what you can do, right? And so typically you need to use, sort of like some judicious application of, if you really need some rich blacks, use the rich blacks. If you don't need the rich blacks, don't necessarily use the rich blacks, right? So what we did on Meow the Infinite, because like I said, we did all this by hand and went through and actually tuned each individual page because we really wanted it to look good. What we did is said, look, anywhere there's text or thin black lines, we want that to be flat black. And anywhere there's like giant regions of black, we want that to be flat black, so it doesn't like oversaturate the page too much or anything. But anywhere that there's just sort of small patches of black in the image, we'll use rich black there because it'll make the comic look more vibrant, right? Because like, if her, eyes here, for example, are that richer black, it'll just be a better looking image. So that's the way we did rich black versus flat black on Meow the Infinite. And so let me show you what that actually looks like in practice. So here's another plate from Meow the Infinite. It's a typical plate. Nothing particularly fancy going on in it. It's a fairly straightforward Cmyk plate. So this is what the Cmyk, if you are in Photoshop and you have an RGB image and you say, make me a Cmyk image out of this, this is what you're going to get. And if we look at the channel breakdown, so if we actually go look at the CMY versus the black channels, this is what we will see. Here is the CMY channel, okay? And what you'll notice is in this CMY channel, all of the places that I just said we don't want there to be CMY ink because it'll make for a blurry image, it's all there, right? And again, this is why just automatically converting your files is not the way to get the best results when you're doing prepress work, because the automatic conversion, it doesn't know very much. It's not like an AI process yet. Maybe someday it will be. But at the moment, it's just stupid. It just does what it does, and you end up having a bunch of rich black, because that means all of this will be rich black because it's CMY inks getting applied and the black channel. You don't want that. So what you want to do is this, and this is what Anna then does by hand with cleanup. And again, because it's Photoshop and we save all of the layering, it's much easier process. She doesn't have to literally go in and paint it all out. She can like use the layer sets to quickly set it. So thankfully it's not as time consuming. But you still have to kind of do it right and say, all right, remove all of the parts that were thin black elements and get those out of the CMY channel, if that makes sense. And so then if you look at the black channel, here's what Photoshop would do automatically. And again, that's mostly right, but this is what you probably actually want, which is a little like bit more black put into like the font areas, because it's only the black ink now. You're not using the CMY to like darken it down further. Okay. So that's the Cmyk setup process that you want to do when you, when you're first doing your prepress pass. So again, just to summarize what you're doing there, you need to find out, you need to set up your color profiles for your monitor. And hopefully you've done that, especially if you're a game developer. You should have been doing that already, so hopefully you're doing that. If you're not a game developer though, go learn about that. Buy a color calibrated monitor from the factory calibrated, or figure out if the one you have can be calibrated. It's usually not very much more expensive. The ones we use at Molly Rocket were very expensive. They're the cheapest monitors we actually bought were our factory color calibrated ones that we just use for previewing. Like the main monitors we use are typically higher res and more expensive actually. So you can buy them very expensive. A couple $100 will get you a monitor that's factory color calibrated these days. So get a factory color calibrated monitor. It doesn't have to be the world's greatest monitor, it just has to be color calibrated, and something you can use as a second monitor on your desk. So it can be a low res monitor even if it needs to be, right? But just something you can use for that, and set that color profile. Then find out from your printer what color profile they use and set that in Photoshop so it knows what your previewing is. When you then take your RGB files and convert them to CMYK, go through, look for any color problems you see, pay careful attention to those neon and fluorescent colors. Those bright, shiny greens and blues, those are gonna cause you problems, so make sure you check them. And then finally, flat black versus rich black. Figure out what your strategy is for that, and figure out what your process is going to be in Photoshop for taking each individual page and producing something nice that will correctly distribute flat blacks and rich blacks where they should be and avoid artifacts you might not want, like some of that chromatic aberration. And that's pretty much the process of going from RGB to CMYK.